Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something, well, more than just a moment in history. We're examining a moment of almost, you could say, utter tactical perfection.
Yeah, an event so flawless, so devastating in its execution, that military historians often put it up there with the greats. We're talking Hannibal at Cannae, Alexander at Gaugamela.
We are diving deep into the Battle of Austerlitz, fought December 2nd, 1805. Just try to picture the scene, these frozen fields near Austerlitz in Moravia, what's now the Czech Republic.
And this single day, it really marks the absolute zenith of Napoleon's power. It's the point where the sun of his empire, well, it was blindingly bright, maybe terrifyingly so.
So our mission today is to unpack this strategic masterpiece. We want to get into not just what happened, but understand how. How did Napoleon manipulate his enemy? The strategy, the psychology, the blow-by-blow narrative of what they call the Battle of the Three Emperors.
Right, and this deep dive, it's really about understanding how the fate of the entire Third Coalition, that's Britain, Russia, Austria, Sweden, how it was basically decided in just a few hours on one day.
To really get Austerlitz, though, you need the context. Europe had been, well, a tinderbox, really, since the French Revolutionary Wars kicked off way back in 1792.
Exactly. And by 1804, 1805, Britain, always funding the opposition on the continent, had managed to stitch together this third coalition. Austria was itching for payback after earlier defeats, and Russia, under a young Tsar Alexander I, was kind of ready to step up as Europe's big savior.
And Napoleon himself, he'd been laser-focused on that plan to invade England, which ultimately didn't happen. So when this coalition pops up, he has to pivot fast.
He does. He takes his huge, newly organized Grand Armée and wheels it eastward, towards the Rhine.
Yeah.
He knew he had to crush these continental powers quickly. Very quickly, before British money and influence could really lock down the opposition.
He needed a decisive blow, and he was already, even then, setting the stage to engineer it, wasn't he? #Tag2, the strategic context and preliminary moves, the bait.
And the immediate run-up to Austerlitz, the stage was really set by Napoleon's earlier triumph, the Ulm campaign. That wrapped up just 2 months before, in October 1805.
And Ulm wasn't just a battle, was it? It was more a strategic demonstration.
Oh, absolutely. A masterclass in strategic mobility. The French army executed this massive wheeling maneuver, swinging right behind the Austrian commander Mack's forces before they could even properly link up with the arriving Russians.
A classic Napoleonic envelopment, just redefined movement for the era.
It really did. And the French didn't just win. They completely cut off the Austrian retreat. The result, 60,000 Austrian prisoners surrendered at Ulm, a catastrophe for the coalition right out of the gate.
Huge momentum shift. And then in November 1805, French forces actually march into Vienna.
Into the capital itself, seizing this massive arsenal, 100,000 muskets, 500 cannons, and crucially, capturing the vital bridges across the Danube intact. That was key.
So on paper, that sounds like an incredible position of strength, unbeatable maybe, but that's a bit misleading, isn't it? Despite Ulm, despite Vienna, Napoleon was actually in a tight spot.
He was deeply vulnerable, strategically overextended. Think about it. His lines of communication snaked hundreds of miles back to France. They were incredibly fragile, open to raids, easily cut.
He's deep in enemy territory.
Deep.
Yeah.
And crucially, he's got this combined Russian and surviving Austrian force, maybe close to 90,000 men, regrouping up to the northeast near Olmütz. And then there's the big question mark hanging over everything: Prussia.
Right. If Prussia decides to jump in with the coalition,
Napoleon could be completely flanked, finished. He knew, absolutely knew, that a long, drawn-out war of attrition dragging into winter would destroy him logistically. Ulm wouldn't matter. He had to force a decisive battle, now, to capitalize on his wins and just survive.
Which brings us to the Allied side, and the Russian commander-in-chief, Mikhail Kutuzov.
Kutuzov, one of the very few who really grasped the strategic danger the Allies were in. He saw Napoleon was stretched thin. His proposed strategy was actually brilliant, if maybe unpalatable to the Tsar.
He wanted to keep retreating, didn't he? Pull Napoleon even further out.
Exactly. A strategy of attrition. A continued, careful retreat deeper into the Carpathian region. Lure Napoleon away from his supply lines, extend him even more. Kutuzov's chilling phrase was he wanted to bury the French in the wilds of Galicia, let winter and distance do the work.
That sounds like the smart, patient play, acknowledge the reality of the situation.
It was the sound strategy.
Yeah.
But Kutuzov's prudence ran headlong into vanity and ego at the very top of the Allied command.
Tsar Alexander, this is.
Alexander, yes. And his circle. Kutuzov was nominally the commander, But the young Tsar, convinced of his own military talent and surrounded by equally eager, inexperienced officers, effectively sidelined him. They found the idea of retreating further, well, dishonorable, especially when they outnumbered the French.
Retreat felt cowardly. They wanted glory now.
Pretty much. So, rejecting Kutuzov's plan, that was arguably the first, maybe the most critical Allied mistake. They were basically walking into Napoleon's psychological setup before a single shot was even fired.
Let's unpack that psychological trap then, because this wasn't just Napoleon getting lucky. This was calculated deception, wasn't it?
Oh, entirely. He needed to convince the Allies that their eagerness, their sense of superiority was completely justified. He needed them to believe he was weak, maybe even cornered, and that attacking him now was the obvious winning move.
How did he project that weakness?
Well, first, troop numbers. He initially deployed only about 53,000 French troops in the immediate vicinity of Austerlitz. This made his force look significantly outnumbered by the Allied total, which is closer to 89,000. He deliberately created a picture of vulnerability, almost like he was desperate for peace.
And then the diplomatic move started. Pure theater.
Absolutely. He sent General Savary off to the Allied headquarters at Olmütz, the official reason, to express Napoleon's sincere desire to avoid battle, maybe negotiate.
But Savary had another mission.
Of course. His real job was reconnaissance. Get a look at the Allied positions, their layout, their mood. And just as Napoleon predicted, Alexander and his advisors saw this peace overture not as genuine, but as proof. Proof of French weakness. Proof that Napoleon was scared.
And then comes the masterstroke involving the actual terrain. Giving up the Pratzen Heights, that must have seemed insane to his own marshals.
It was strategically brilliant, but yes, probably felt utterly wrong tactically. The Pratzen Heights dominate the whole area. Strategic high ground, Napoleon specifically ordered Marshal Soult to abandon it. And not just abandon it, but make it look messy, maybe even panicked.
Like a chaotic retreat.
Exactly. To violently tempt the Allies to surge forward and occupy those heights immediately. He needed them to believe they had chased the French off the decisive ground.
And then the final touch, the personal interview request. He knew who the Tsar would likely send, didn't he?
He played Alexander perfectly. Napoleon requested a personal meeting with the Tsar, probably knowing he wouldn't get it. Instead, Alexander sent Prince Peter Dolgorukov, who was known to be just as young and impetuous as the Tsar himself.
And Napoleon put on a performance for him.
A command performance. He acted anxious, hesitant, maybe even a little depressed, stressed his desire for peace above all else. Dolgorukov bought it completely. He rushed back to the Tsar, assuring him the French army was practically broken on the verge of collapse.
That sealed it.
That was the trigger. By December 1st, the discussion in the Allied camp wasn't if they should attack anymore. It was just about how quickly they could organize the assault to crush this supposedly vulnerable French emperor. The trap was fully sprung. #3 forces and the battlefield geography.
Okay, so the psychological trap is set. Let's look at the pieces on the board. The armies themselves and the ground they were about to fight on. This terrain near Austerlitz became the perfect stage, really.
Right. On the French side, Napoleon had around 72,000 men available by the time the battle started, plus about 157 guns. But the key here isn't just numbers, it's the quality. This was the Grande Armée.
Highly trained veteran troops.
And crucially, organized into the corps system. This was a major Napoleonic innovation. These corps were like mini armies themselves, large, combined arms formations with infantry, cavalry, artillery, capable of operating independently for extended periods. That flexibility was absolutely vital.
Allowed him to react quickly, shift forces.
Precisely. Now, the Allies, they definitely had the numbers. Somewhere between 85,000 and 89,000 soldiers, about 70% of them Russian. And they had a huge advantage in artillery, 318 guns.
Double the French artillery.
Yeah. But while they had the numbers, they lacked that same level of cohesive organization and, perhaps more importantly, unified command that the French corps system provided. They were more like a collection of national contingents rather than a single integrated fighting machine.
Okay, let's map out the battlefield itself, because the geography near Austerlitz is absolutely key to understanding Napoleon's whole plan. There are three main features, right?
Exactly. First, you've got the northern flank. This area was anchored by two hills, Santon Hill, which Napoleon fortified, and Urai Hill. Urai was particularly important. It's higher ground, about 880 feet, overlooking the main road running east-west, the Olomouc to Brno road. This was Napoleon's new, secured line of communication, and it's where he initially set up his command post.
Okay, so the north is secure, then there's the southern flank. This was designed as the trap, essentially.
That's right. The southern part of the battlefield is defined by a stream, the Goldbach. Mostly frozen in December, but the ground around it was marshy, difficult. You have the villages of Telmitz and Sokolnitz right on the stream. This whole area, Napoleon deliberately left very lightly defended, just a thin screen of French troops under General Legrand. It was meant to look vulnerable, to draw the Allied attack.
Designed to bend but not break until help arrived.
Precisely. It had to hold just long enough. And then, the centerpiece of the whole battlefield, the Pratzen Heights.
The high ground everyone talks about.
Yes, Pratzen or Pratzencheck. It's not dramatically steep like a mountain, but it's a broad, gently sloping plateau that absolutely dominates the entire valley. From the Pratzen Heights, you can see everything north, south, the villages, the stream. Napoleon knew this ground. He'd scouted it. He told his marshals to study it carefully beforehand. He knew whoever controlled the Pratzen Heights controlled the battle. #tag forfeit, Allied miscalculation and French dispositions.
So picture the Allied Council of War, December 1st. Kutuzov's caution is basically brushed aside. They go with the plan drawn up by the Austrian Chief of Staff, Franz von Weyrother. What was the core thinking behind Weyrother's plan?
Weyrother's entire plan was built on a fatal misunderstanding, fueled by Napoleon's deception. He was utterly convinced that Napoleon was primarily concerned about protecting his line of communication back towards Vienna, which Weyrother assumed ran south from the French right flank.
So the goal was to cut that perceived supply line.
Exactly. The Allied plan called for a massive main attack, using 4 huge columns of troops, driving straight into the seemingly weak French right flank near Telmitz and Sokolnitz. The idea was to smash through, turn north, and roll up the French line, cutting Napoleon off from Vienna.
They were chasing a ghost line, really. And in committing almost everything to this southern push,
they fatally weakened their own center. To get that overwhelming force needed for this southern attack, they pulled the vast majority of their troops off the Pratzen Heights. This stripped the most vital ground on the entire battlefield of nearly all its defenders.
Leaving who up there?
Essentially just the units that hadn't yet started moving south as part of the initial columns, plus the Russian Imperial Guard, which was held further back in reserve. The center became dangerously thin.
And poor Kutuzov, the nominal commander-in-chief, he's basically sidelined.
Completely. He was given direct command of only the Ivy Corps, one of the very columns ordered off the heights. Tactical control was effectively handed to Weyrother and the column commanders. Kutuzov was a figurehead at this point.
So Napoleon watches this happen, sees them thinning out the center.
And knows his gamble is paying off. He'd predicted this exact move. He'd essentially drawn the bulk of the Allied army southwards, leaving their center exposed, just as he'd hoped. His famous quote was something like, "If the Russian force leaves the Pratzen Heights to go to the right side, they will certainly be defeated." The bait was taken.
Okay, let's talk about the French counterpunch then. The force hidden, waiting to strike the Pratzen Heights.
That crucial task fell to Marshal Soult and his Ivy Corps. We're talking about 16,000 or so of the Grande Armée's best infantry, and they were positioned brilliantly.
Hidden from view.
Completely hidden in what's called dead ground, right at the foot of the Pratzen Heights. These were soles in the terrain, small valleys, hollows, perfect for concealing thousands of troops from anyone looking down from the plateau above.
So 16,000 elite soldiers just sitting there waiting for the signal. What was their mission once they took the heights?
It was a two-phase mission, really. First, launch the main assault, storm the heights, and secure that commanding ground. Second, once the heights were taken, pivot and attack down into the rear and flank of the huge Allied force that was still slugging it out down by Telmitz and Sokolnitz.
Turning their own attack back on them. A double envelopment.
Precisely. Turning the Allied main effort into a death trap. But this whole audacious plan rested heavily on one unpredictable factor: the weather. Specifically, the fog.
Ah, yes, the famous fog of Austerlitz.
It was a massive gamble. These river valleys in Moravia often fill with thick ground fog in December mornings. Napoleon counted on this fog to cloak Soult's initial movements, to hide those 16,000 men assembling right under the Allies' noses.
But the timing of the fog lifting was critical.
Absolutely critical. If it lifted too early, Soult's columns would be exposed during their ascent, vulnerable to artillery fire. If it lingered too long, Napoleon wouldn't be able to see when the Allies had sufficiently cleared off the heights to launch the attack. He needed that visual confirmation.
Incredible confidence in timing, observation, and maybe a bit of luck with the weather.
You could say that. Now, we can't forget the immense risk on the southern flank either. That thin line, held by General Legrand's division, they were the bait, remember. facing multiple massive Allied columns.
They had to hold out against overwhelming odds.
They had to bend, give ground, maybe lose the villages temporarily, but they absolutely could not break completely. And their ability to just hang on to absorb that initial hammer blow depended entirely on the timely arrival of reinforcements, specifically Marshal Davout's Third Corps.
Davout at the Iron Marshal and his famous forced march.
One of the most legendary forced marches in military history. Davout's Third Corps marched an astonishing 110 kilometers, that's about 68 miles, all the way from Vienna.
In just 48 hours, through December conditions.
Incredible. An unbelievable feat of endurance and discipline. Davout's arrival, even just his leading elements under General Feigned, was the absolute linchpin of Napoleon's entire strategy. Without them plugging that gap on the right flank, the Allied assault would have surely broken through, rolled up the French line, and the whole Pratzen Heights counterattack would have been irrelevant.
So the plan relied on perfect timing and execution across huge distances. What about the rest of the French forces?
Napoleon kept his powerful reserves close at hand. The Imperial Guard, both infantry and cavalry, along with Bernadotte's Corps, were held centrally near Jura Hill, ready to be committed wherever needed, either to exploit Soult's success or to deal with any unexpected crisis.
And the northern flank?
Further north, Marshal Lannes' Corps and Murat's large cavalry reserve were positioned to guard that vital Olomouc-Breno road, Napoleon's actual line of communication. Their job was mainly to pin down the Allied right wing under the Russian Prince Bagration and Liechtenstein's cavalry.
So by the evening of December 1st, every French piece is exactly where Napoleon wants it, waiting for the Allies to walk deeper into the trap he'd so carefully prepared. All right, the stage is set. Dawn breaks, December 2nd, 1805. A cold, foggy morning. The battle kicks off around 8 a.m., Phase 1. The feint begins.
As expected, the Allies launched their main attack in the south. Heavy pressure immediately came down on the villages of Telnitz and Sokolnitz, right along the Golbag stream. The French Third Line Regiment defending Telnitz found itself in savage fighting right away.
Pushed back initially.
Yes, they were briefly kicked out of Telnitz, then counterattacked and managed to retake it, only to be thrown out again by the sheer weight of numbers from the first Allied column under Kienmeyer. It was desperate stuff.
How long could Legrand's men possibly hold under that kind of pressure before Davout arrived?
They were stretched incredibly thin, bending almost to the breaking point. But then, just in time, the first elements of Davout's Third Corps started arriving on the scene. Specifically, France's division, exhausted from their epic march, but they went straight into the fight.
That must have been a huge relief for Legrand.
Absolutely critical. Their arrival stabilized the French right flank, allowing Legrand's survivors to consolidate. They couldn't stop the Allied advance completely, but they slowed it down, contained it, pinned those huge Allied columns down in the marshy ground around the stream, exactly what Napoleon needed them to do.
And there was some confusion within the Allied attack itself.
There was. Some Austrian cavalry under Liechtenstein, meant to support the infantry advance, actually got tangled up with the second infantry column, slowing things down. Ironically, while the Allied planners saw this as a blunder, the resulting congestion probably made the attack feel even more massive to the French defenders initially. So Kolnitz, the next village north of Telnitz, became an absolute meat grinder, changing hands multiple times as the second and third Allied columns slammed into it.
But while all this fierce fighting is happening in the south, the truly decisive, maybe fatal move for the Allies is happening up on the Pratzen Heights.
That's right. Tsar Alexander III is effectively overruling Kutuzov. Kutuzov knew the heights were vital and tried to keep troops there. But the Tsar, fully committed to Weyrother's plan and smelling victory, ordered Kutuzov's own 5e Corps to move off the plateau and march south to reinforce the attack on Telnitz and Sokolnitz.
Reinforce an attack that was already massively strong and empty the key ground.
Precisely. Driven by overconfidence and impatience, that order stripped the center of the battlefield of its main defenders. The Allied army was now fully, irrevocably committed to Napoleon's trap.
Which brings us to Phase 2. It's about 8:45 a.m. Napoleon is watching intently from his command post on Jura Hill.
He sees it. He sees the last major formations of Kutuzov's 5e Corps sliding off the heights, heading south. The center is weak, exposed. The bait has been swallowed whole. He turns to Marshal Soult, whose corps is hidden below,
and asks the crucial question.
How long will it take you to reach the Pratzen Heights? Soult, famously confident, replies, Less than 20 minutes, sire. Napoleon waits just a little longer, maybe 15 minutes, lets the Allies commit even further south. Then he gives the order.
The order to attack the heights.
Yes. reportedly adding one sharp blow and the war is over. Soult's two divisions, St. Hilaire's and Van Damme's, begin their ascent from the concealing mists.
And this is the moment that becomes legendary, the sun of Austerlitz.
Exactly. The timing was almost mythical. Just as Soult's columns began their climb, the thick morning fog suddenly lifted, burned away by a brilliant, rising winter sun. And this sun glinted off the thousands of ascending French bayonets,
Revealed to the stunned Allied troops still on the heights.
Imagine the shock. The few remaining Russian and Austrian defenders look down and see this dense mass of blue-clad French infantry surging up towards them out of the mist. They realize, far too late, that the decisive ground is being snatched from under them.
The fighting on the Pratzen must have been vicious then, as the Allies desperately try to hold on.
It was brutal, close quarters fighting. St. Hilaire's division, leading the charge, initially faced superior numbers of Austrians and Russians who hadn't yet left. They were actually forced back momentarily.
A critical moment.
Could have been. But St. Hilaire's veterans rallied, counterattacked fiercely, relying on the bayonet, and eventually overwhelmed the defenders, securing the southern part of the heights. To their north, Van Damme's division stormed the area called the Stare Vinorati, the Old Vineyards, breaking several Allied battalions there.
So by late morning, the French hold the center.
They do. Napoleon himself moved his command post up onto the captured Pratzen Heights, likely near a small chapel called St. Anthony's Chapel. From there, he had a commanding view of the entire battlefield, watching the Allied plan completely unravel below him.
But securing the heights wasn't the end of the battle, was it? The Allies still had their elite reserve force?
No, the battle entered its third climactic phase. The Allies still had the prestigious Russian Imperial Guard, held in reserve under Grand Duke Constantine, the Tsar's brother, and Constantine launched a desperate counterattack.
Aimed where?
Right into Van Damme's sector, near the Old Vineyards, trying to retake the heights. This was probably the fiercest fighting of the day. The Russian Guard infantry and cavalry charged with incredible courage.
And this is where the French suffered a symbolic loss.
It is. During this chaotic melee, the Russian Guard cavalry managed to break through and capture the Eagle standard of the French 4th Line Regiment's 1st Battalion. It was the only French Eagle lost during the entire battle, a significant blow to French pride, even in victory.
A potential crisis for Napoleon? He has to respond decisively.
He does. Seeing his line wavering under the Guard's assault, Napoleon committed his own guard. He unleashed the heavy cavalry of the Imperial Guard, the big cuirassiers, the chasseurs de cheval.
Guard versus guard.
Exactly. The French Guard cavalry crashed into their Russian counterparts, a clash of titans that shattered the Russian charge. Napoleon also threw in Drouet's infantry division from Bernadotte's corps, which had been held in reserve. Their combined firepower and shock action routed the Russian Guard infantry.
And Kutuzov.
Kutuzov himself was severely wounded during this desperate fighting in the center. His injury further crippled the already collapsing Allied command structure.
While this crisis in the center is being resolved, what's happening on the northern flank?
Up north, things were also reaching a conclusion. There had been a prolonged cavalry battle between Liechtenstein's Austrian and Russian heavy cavalry and Murat's French cavalry screen under Kellerman.
A swirling cavalry melee.
Yes, for quite some time. But eventually Murat committed 2 fresh divisions of French heavy cuirassiers. Their charge proved decisive, breaking the Allied cavalry. With the cavalry threat neutralized, Marshal Lannes could then focus his infantry on Prince Bagration's Russian infantry, holding the Allied right wing.
And Lannes pushed them back.
He did. Bagration conducted a skillful fighting withdrawal, but Lannes' corps steadily drove the Russians off the field, securing the northern flank completely and protecting Napoleon's communication line.
So, center secured, north secured. Napoleon now turns his full attention back to the south, back to the troops caught in the original trap.
Exactly. It's now afternoon, maybe around 2 p.m., 1400 hours. The Allied army is hopelessly fragmented. Napoleon directs the final crushing blow against the Allied left wing, the very force that was supposed to win the battle for them.
Attacking from 2 directions now.
Yes, St. Hilaire's division attacked down from the captured Pratzen Heights, while Devote's 3rd Corps, now fully arrived and engaged, attacked up from the Goldbach stream. They converged on the village of Sokolnitz.
Caught in a pincer.
A devastating pincer movement. It completely shattered the remaining Allied columns trapped in the valley. What was left of the Allied left wing dissolved into a total rout.
And the Allied commanders in the south.
They fled.
Yeah.
Keenmayer, Langeron, even General Buxhouden, who was technically in command of the entire Allied left, reportedly drunk, or at least heavily disoriented, abandoned his troops and fled the field. Complete command breakdown.
Which leads to that final grim image of the battle, the flight across the frozen ponds.
The Sachem Ponds incident. As total panic set in, thousands of defeated Russian soldiers tried to escape southward towards Vienna by crossing some frozen ponds near the village of Sachsen.
And the French artillery opened up on them.
Positioned perfectly up on the Pratzen Heights, the French gunners had clear shots. They allegedly directed heavy fire onto the ice. Whether it was solely the artillery or the sheer weight of the fleeing men and wagons, the ice broke.
Napoleon's initial reports exaggerated the numbers drowned, didn't they?
Massively. His bulletins spoke of thousands drowning. Later investigations, when the ponds were drained years later, apparently found relatively few human remains, perhaps less than a handful. But they did find scores of drowned horses, maybe 150 or so, and dozens of sunken cannons and wagons.
So maybe not the mass drowning event of the propaganda, but still horrific.
Still a scene of utter chaos and terror. And importantly, Tsar Alexander himself later confirmed the incident happened and was severe. Regardless of the exact number of men who drowned, the image of the routed army breaking through the ice became the final, chilling symbol of the Allies' catastrophic defeat at Austerlitz. #6. Military, political, and historical results.
Let's talk about the aftermath. The numbers alone tell a story of just how decisive this was.
They really do. The butcher's bill was starkly one-sided. Fringer losses were around 9,000 killed and wounded, out of maybe 66,000 who were really engaged. That's heavy, about 13%, but considering the scale of the victory.
Manageable, compared to the Allies.
Catastrophic for the Allies. Estimates vary slightly, but they lost somewhere around 36,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. That's out of roughly 89,000 effectives. So something like 38% of their entire army was gone in a single day. Plus, the French captured 180 artillery pieces and around 50 regimental standards, a total wrecking.
Which is why it gets called the Battle of the Three Emperors.
Exactly. Even though, technically, Emperor Francis I of Austria wasn't actually present on the battlefield itself, only Tsar Alexander I and Napoleon were, but the scale of the defeat, involving the forces of three empires, certainly justified the name.
And Tsar Alexander's reaction summed it up.
His reporting comment captures the sense of shock and humiliation perfectly. "We are babies in the hands of a giant." It really felt like that to the Allies.
And this single battle just instantly shattered the Third Coalition on the continent. The political fallout was immediate.
Immediate and decisive. The war on the continent was effectively over. Just 2 days later, December 4th, France and Austria signed a truce.
That quickly.
Which led to the formal Treaty of Pressburg, signed on December 26th. Austria was officially out of the war, and the terms were harsh. Very harsh.
What did Austria have to concede?
Significant territory. They had to give up lands to Napoleon's German allies, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, which massively boosted French influence right in the heart of Central Europe. Austria also had to recognize Napoleon's earlier gains in Italy, ceding Venice to his Kingdom of Italy. And maybe most painfully for Vienna, they had to pay a huge indemnity, 40 million gold francs to France.
Beyond just Austria, Austerlitz fundamentally reshaped the political map of Europe, didn't it? It had long-term geopolitical consequences.
Oh, profound consequences. This victory gave Napoleon the political capital and military dominance to essentially redraw the map of Germany. He created the Confederation of the Rhine, a bloc of German states, formerly part of the Holy Roman Empire, now allied with and effectively dependent on France.
Which basically killed off the Holy Roman Empire.
Exactly. This ancient 1,000-year-old entity, already weak and fragmented, became utterly irrelevant overnight. So much so that the following year, 1806, Emperor Francis VI formally dissolved it. He wisely kept his title as Emperor of Austria, which he'd created earlier, but the Holy Roman Empire was gone.
And this rise of French power in Germany directly led to the next conflict.
Directly. Prussia, which had stayed neutral in 1805, watched this happen with growing alarm. The Confederation of the Rhine, this massive French client state on their border, felt like an existential threat. Prussian anxieties about French dominance led them straight into the War of the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon in 1806. Austerlitz basically set the stage for Jena Auerstedt.
Back in France, the victory must have been intoxicating. How did Napoleon leverage it domestically?
Masterfully. He used the rhetoric of Austerlitz to boost morale and, critically, financial confidence. His proclamation to the army became instantly famous. Soldats, Je suis content de vous, soldiers. I am pleased with you.
He called them the finest warriors in the world.
He did. The recollection of this day and of your deeds will be eternal. Pure Napoleonic rhetoric, but incredibly effective. And he backed it up with tangible rewards.
Money talks.
Indeed. 2 million gold francs were distributed among the higher officers. Every single soldier received a bonus of 200 francs, a very significant sum for the time. Pensions were granted to the widows of the fallen, and in a brilliant PR move,
The adoption of the orphans?
yes, he personally adopted the orphan children of the soldiers killed at Austerlitz, granting them the right to add Napoleon to their names. An incredible gesture of paternalism and propaganda.
And the financial markets in Paris responded.
Immediately. French government bonds, which had been shaky due to the war's cost, jumped significantly. They went from about 45% of their face value before the battle to 66% afterwards. Austerlitz wasn't just a military triumph. It restored financial stability and confidence in the empire. #TagSiv7. Conclusion and final thoughts. So when you look back, Austerlitz stands as, well, almost the perfect battle for military theorists. It's a textbook case study in so many things.
Like manipulating your enemy.
Exactly. Understanding and exploiting the enemy's assumptions. Executing a massive, convincing feint, that whole southern flank strategy. And then the timing. The perfect timing of the decisive counterattack on the Pratzen Heights. It's maneuver warfare at its absolute peak.
It embodies that idea of strategic patience, doesn't it?
Right.
Waiting for the enemy to make the critical error. Which reminds me of that famous, maybe apocryphal, quote, attributed to Napoleon during the battle.
You mean the one about not interrupting your enemy?
That's the one. Reportedly, as his marshals watched the Allies streaming down from the Pratzen, eager to attack, Napoleon held them back, saying something like, "When the enemy is making a false movement, we must take good care not to interrupt him."
Right, which often gets shortened to that classic military maxim. Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Whether he actually said those exact words or not, it perfectly captures the cold, calculating logic behind the victory. Let them walk deeper into the trap.
But that very perfection, that completeness of the victory, raises a fascinating historical question, doesn't it? One that historians still debate. Was Austerlitz, in a way, too successful for Napoleon's own good?
That's a really profound point to consider. There's a strong argument to be made that the sheer scale and, frankly, the relative ease with which he dismantled the Third Coalition at Austerlitz might have had a detrimental long-term effect on Napoleon himself.
How so?
Well, some argue it cemented a belief in his own invincibility, that it perhaps caused him to lose touch with the political and logistical realities of perpetual war. Did Austerlitz mark a shift where French foreign policy, previously maybe driven by revolutionary ideals or national interest, became something else, became a purely personal Napoleonic one, driven by his own ambition, his own ego, his belief that he could reshape Europe by force of will alone?
So the dazzling sun of Austerlitz might have actually blinded the giant, made him believe he could achieve anything, ignore the risks.
It's certainly possible. The confidence gained from dismantling ancient empires and redrawing the map so decisively in 1805, did that plant the seeds for the overreach that would come later? The Peninsula War, the disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812.
So the question for you, our listener, to think about is this. How did this single incredibly brilliant day on the fields of Moravia reshape Napoleon's own approach to power? Did the very zenith of his military genius paradoxically set him on the path towards his ultimate downfall?
A heavy question, but one worth pondering when considering the legacy of Austerlitz.
Indeed. A truly fascinating battle to unpack. Thank you for guiding us through this absolute masterpiece of military history.
My pleasure. It's always incredible to revisit Austerlitz.